Hi, welcome to my video, and today I'm talking about my old radio again. And this is a tube radio, and it's an analog radio. And everything's digital now, so you really, I don't know if people that are raised on digital are even gonna know the difference between digital and analog, but to me, I notice a difference between analog and digital audio. And this is a radio from 1941, and it's all tube analog radio, 10 tubes. It's got push-pull audio, which is a type of um, amplification, I guess. Um, so when you buy a radio like this, there's lots of considerations, and I'm going to talk about some of the considerations when buying a radio of this age, okay? So one of the great things about this radio is with a good antenna, you can hear radio stations from around the world if it's in good working condition and if you have a good antenna. And you don't have to subscribe to internet, you don't have to subscribe to anything. It's free. The radio waves are free to listen to. So this radio was made in the United States in 1941. It's called a Hallicrafters SX25. It's got a lot of nice features that are not found on more basic radios. It's got a beat frequency oscillator. It's got a crystal tuning. It's got selectivity. It's got broad and narrow tuning features. It's got noise leveling, low high tone. It's got something called an S meter. It's a really great radio. And if this radio is in good working shape, there's a possibility you can get this radio to work just like the day it was brand new. Okay, but it's not going to be that easy. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the biggest hurdles to getting this radio to work like it's brand spanking new, even maybe better than brand new. Okay, you can order old stock tubes, so you can order tubes that have been on the shelf for 40 years. They've never been used, they're brand new, but they've been sitting on a shelf for somewhere for 40 years. You can buy them from between $10 and $20, including and then shipping might be on top of that from places like eBay. So I ordered a whole set of tubes for this radio, spares, so they're still available. So that's one of the hurdles for this radio. The other hurdle for this radio is that you probably have to fix the tuning, because there's probably going to be, there's a cord that, the dial cord that from the knob that you turn the tuning to the dial that shows you where you're tuning, that cord is probably going to be broken on an old radio like this, and you're probably going to have to replace that cord, and that's a bit of a job. If you find a radio that's in good condition, then you can restore it. And so you don't want a radio that's been sitting out in the rain and that, water has gotten into all of the switches and everything like that. It's probably not going to be a good idea to fix. If you find a radio that's been, like this radio I found, looks like it's been pretty much kept indoors. It was quite dusty, but it looks like it was stored indoors, like in a garage maybe. So it was worth it to restore it. I'm going to show you the inside of the radio now. This is the bottom of the radio, and you can see, I'll show you the different sections. There's the tuning section right here. There's the transformers on the back here. These are the black things are where the tubes go on the other side. The tubes are on the other side. These yellow things are capacitors that have been replaced, and capacitors are like little mini batteries. Over here in the back here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a fuse. I replaced that fuse right here. I put a fuse in. These are the transformers. This is an old resistor. This is an older resistor. And so anyways, you can see some of the components in there. Now I'm going to talk about resistors. Now all resistors are not the same, and The resistors are special resistors for this radio, and this is why you're not going to be able to fix this radio if you just go to your local electronics store and buy resistors off the shelf. Your radio is not going to be fixed. Okay, and this is what you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube and they don't talk about this. And that is the resistors have to be um, pretty much high tolerance resistors. Like there's such a thing as 1% resistors, and they're 1% tolerance. That means that if the resistor says it's 500 ohms, it's going to be really close to 500 ohms. It's not going to be out by very much. And on a radio like this, the closer the tolerance you have, or the smaller the tolerance you have of the resistor, the better the radio is going to work. And but this is a really critical thing because, like I said, with the tubes, if you go and replace only the dead tubes on your radio, maybe you'll have to spend about $50 on the tubes. Capacitors, maybe you'll have to spend between $30 and $60 replacing all of your capacitors. This is the expenses to fixing this radio, okay? And nobody talks about the resistors. And off-the-shelf resistors are cheap, okay? They're not going to cut it. If you go around this radio, you're going to find the voltages go from like 1 volt to 300 volts in some places on this radio. And there's lots of places on this radio where the voltages is up over 200 volts. The other thing about this radio is there's lots of high heat on this radio, okay? The tubes throw out a lot of heat, and so the resistors are going to be, um, they're in an environment where there's lots of heat and there's lots of high voltage. So on the schematic for this radio, it says that all of the resistors are half a watt, and if you replace them with modern half-watt resistors, they're not going to cut it. I replaced all of these resistors with half watt, and I checked it a couple weeks later, and they're already going out of tolerance. So you're not going to cut it. Now I'm going to show you what this an expensive resistor looks like. Okay, this is something called a Dale carbon. Okay, carbon resistors are the best thing to use for this radio. Okay, and it doesn't matter if you use bigger carbon resistors, they're still going to work the same. Say if you only needed a half watt resistor, but you put in a 2 watt resistor, it's not going to change things. In fact, it's going to probably be better than a half watt resistor. So the higher watt, the better. I mean, as long as it's not crazy huge. Like as you can see, that big black resistor there, that's a giant resistor. You couldn't replace that resistor everywhere. There's that big black one right here. But for the size of that resistor, it's right on where it should be. I think it's 15k ohms, and it's right on 15. It's either 15k or 150 ohms, and it's right on 150 ohms. It's not out of tolerance at all. So, but here's the consideration to make. If you want this radio to work probably as good as new and probably stay working well longer than new, then you're looking at something like these carbon. I would, this is what I'm going to put on. I don't have them here, right? You can see I got cheap resistors in there right now, but I'm going to do this whole radio in 2 watt, like 1 to 2 watt, probably 2 watt carbon resistors with high tolerance, like 1% tolerance resistors. Now these things are not cheap, okay? Like I got a bunch of them, and you might have to put together values. So say if in your radio you have values of like 100 ohms, 200 ohms, 250 ohms, if you get a bunch of hundreds and a bunch of 50s, you don't have to buy 250 ohms because you can just, put 100 and 150 together. Well, you get the idea, right? If you have 250 ohms, you can put 2 together to get a 500 ohm resistor, stuff like that. So you might be able to get by on ordering less, different types of resistors. But I'm on DigiKey, and I'm on the Canadian DigiKey, and Vichy, these are Vichy 1% carbon resistors, and they are not cheap. They are, $5 plus per one resistor. Okay, so yeah, there's a big difference. What I'm trying to tell you is that there's a big difference between the cheap resistors that are lower wattage and the more expensive high tolerance resistors, and it's a big price difference. So I'm saying that, this radio here, if it's out of tolerance, it's not going to work. It's pretty simple. If your resistors are way out of tolerance, your radio is just not going to work, and it's just that simple. And it could be even worse because you could end up damaging the radio if it's really bad, or damaging the tubes, etc., etc. So, anyways, so to make a long story short, is that if you want this radio to function perfectly, and believe me, this radio can function like the day it came off the factory, out of the factory, and it's really nice. And believe me, um, when I replaced a lot of the new components, it was working amazingly well. And I attached a nice antenna to it, and it sounds great. And it's a fantastic radio. It only sounds better when you put better components into it. It's like an engine, you're putting better gasoline into it or something like that. But this is, for anybody that buys this radio, you're basically, if you start replacing, because what happens with the original resistors is, because if the original resistors have been, if they've had like constantly, 200, 300 volts on those resistors, when you pull those resistors and you measure them, a lot of them are going to be out of tolerance. So the radio is not going to work like it was when it was brand new. And so, like I said, what you can do is you can replace them with cheap resistors, like no-name brand resistors that are rated at 1 watt or half a watt, and I'm telling you, they're not going to be any good. And you're going to have to sort through them to get any kind of decent tolerance on them. And so I would, for the longevity of this radio, and for having a radio that was like right off the shelf, and I would actually spring for the Vishay carbon 1%, or carbon, at least carbons, and at least 2 waters. So this radio, I'm going to actually try to get everything on this radio done in 2 waters. That's 50 volts or more. That's being seen at with 50 volts or more. So anyways, I just wanted to, show you that. That's something that you don't see a lot of people talking about, resistors and resistor values and types of resistors in these old radios. And it would go the same for any tube gear, basically tube amps and everything. Although they're not as critical as radios, because for radios to work the way they're intended to work, you have to have everything pretty close to the tolerances and things like that. So I hope that helps a lot of people. I really massively enjoy this radio. It's a joy. But I also care about this radio. I want it to run properly, and that's why I've actually, I'm gonna go ahead and spend like a couple $100 just on high quality 1% carbon resistors that are around 1 to 2 watts for the entire radio. So anyways, just to let you know that if you really want to get into one of these projects, and you want to get it up and working properly, factor that into the budget, because I really think it's like, if you want to restore something to its original condition, you want to get at least as good components for the antique or the restoration, to get it as much as to the original condition as possible. So I hope people like this video, and it doesn't mean you still, after you use the radio, you still have to check the tolerances every once in a while. Even if you get a whole bunch of new resistors in and I put them in, I'm still going to be, keeping an eye on things and seeing how they hold up over time. So thanks for watching.